The lawyer's office smelled faintly of old carpet and burnt coffee, the kind that sits too long on a warming plate. I remember that because my senses felt sharper than usual, like grief had peeled away a layer of protection and left everything raw. The lawyer paused, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Before we continue, I want to make sure everyone understands the scope of the estate." Raymond leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other. He looked comfortable, settled, like a man who had already counted his winnings. I sat stiffly, Mama's cardigan wrapped tight around me, my fingers tracing a loose thread at the cuff. I kept my eyes down, afraid that if I looked up, I'd see confirmation of what I already feared, that I had been naive, that I had trusted too easily. But before the will revealed anything, my mind wandered back to how we got here. Before sickness, before funerals, before that quiet cruelty disguised as concern. Growing up, Raymond was always the loud one, the confident one. He spoke for both of us when we were kids, told waiters what we wanted, told teachers our excuses, told Mama he'd handle it when Daddy asked questions. I was the quieter one, the listener, the one Mama leaned on when she needed help balancing the checkbook or remembering appointments. Daddy used to say I had old eyes, the kind that noticed things others skipped over. It worked when we were children. As adults, it created a gap neither of us knew how to bridge. When Mama first started getting sick, Raymond argued we should put her in a facility. "It's safer," he said over the phone. "Professionals know what they're doing." I said I'd move back home. Someone had to. At first, Raymond praised me endlessly, told everyone how lucky Mama was to have me, how he couldn't do what I was doing. But praise, I learned, has a shelf life. As months turned into years, his visits felt less like help and more like inspections. He'd walk through the house, making notes aloud. "We should replace this fridge. This roof won't last another winter. You know, property values are high right now." I didn't connect the dots then. I was too busy measuring medication, washing sheets, helping Mama bathe when her hands shook too badly to button her own clothes. Love narrows your vision. The lawyer's voice pulled me back to the present. "The will was updated 3 years ago," he said. 3 years. That was right around the time Mama's memory started slipping badly, around the time Raymond began handling paperwork. My stomach tightened. Raymond glanced at me, just briefly. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was set. The lawyer continued, reading carefully, methodically. "To my children, Raymond and—" He said my name next. Hearing it out loud felt strange, official, heavy. Raymond shifted in his seat. The lawyer read on about savings accounts, personal belongings, sentimental items. Mama had left Raymond her wedding ring. She left me her handwritten recipe book, the one stained with flour and thyme. That part didn't surprise me. Then came the house. "The family residence," he said, "is to remain jointly owned with the condition that—" Raymond straightened, "that the child who has been residing in the home and serving as primary caregiver will retain lifetime residency rights." The room went silent. I felt like the air had been knocked from my chest. Raymond's face drained of color. The lawyer kept going, explaining in clear terms what Mama and Daddy had decided together, that the house was never meant to be sold out from under me, that my years of care, sacrifice, and presence had been seen, documented, protected. Raymond interrupted. "That can't be right," he said sharply. "She wasn't well when that was written." The lawyer didn't flinch. "2 physicians signed off on her mental competency at the time. All documentation is here." I finally looked at my brother. For the first time since Mama died, he looked small, angry, cornered. The lawyer finished reading, his voice steady as stone. "The house wasn't just protected for me, it was left primarily to me. Raymond was entitled to a portion of the financial assets, but the home, the heart of our family, belonged to the one who had stayed, me. We didn't speak in the hallway afterwards. Raymond walked ahead, his footsteps fast, clipped. I followed more slowly, my legs shaky, my mind racing. Outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight hit the pavement in a way that felt almost inappropriate, like the world hadn't gotten the memo that something monumental had just happened. Raymond stopped near his car. "You knew," he said without turning around. "I didn't," I replied quietly. "He's funny how that works out." I wanted to argue, to list every night I slept with one ear open, every meal I cooked, every fear I swallowed so Mama wouldn't see it. But I didn't, because this wasn't about convincing him. It was about finally understanding him. He'd pushed me out because he assumed the house was already his, because my presence complicated his plans, because to him, love was always something that could be managed, minimized, or moved aside. "I just wanted what was fair," he said, his voice tight. I met his eyes then. "So did they," I said. "That's why they wrote it down." He got in his car without another word. I stood there long after he drove away, sunlight warming my face, grief and relief tangled together in my chest. I had been pushed out of my own home, but I had not been forgotten, not by Mama, not by Daddy, and not by the truth. That night, I returned to the house. I unlocked the door slowly, half expecting it to reject me. It didn't. The familiar creak of the floorboards greeted me like an old friend. I set my bag down and stood in the living room, breathing in the scent of lavender and lemon and something that felt like safety. I wasn't celebrating, I was reclaiming. And I knew deep down that the hardest part still lay ahead, because justice may be written on paper, but healing has to be lived. When my brother told me I had to leave the house, he didn't raise his voice, and somehow that hurt more. He stood in the doorway of our parents' bedroom, arms crossed, eyes fixed on a spot just over my shoulder, like I was already a memory he was trying to forget. The house smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner, the way it had since Mama passed, and the silence between us felt heavier than the furniture we hadn't moved yet. "I think it's best if you start making arrangements," he said softly. "This house, it's just too much right now." Too much? That's how he described the place where we learned to walk, where Daddy used to hum gospel songs on Sunday mornings, where Mama's laughter still felt trapped in the walls. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. I nodded because grief had already taken so much from me, and I didn't know how to fight for anything else. That night, I packed my clothes into trash bags because all the suitcases were still in the attic, right where Daddy left them the last time we traveled as a family. My hands shook as I folded sweaters Mama had bought me years ago, the ones she insisted were good quality, even when I said they were too warm. I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the quiet hum of a house that no longer felt like it belonged to me. I didn't know then that the real story hadn't even started yet. I only knew that I was being erased, slowly, politely, and without witnesses. Before everything fell apart, life had been simple in a way you don't appreciate until it's gone. I moved back home 3 years before Mama died, not because I failed at life like some people whispered, but because she started forgetting things, little things at first, where she left her keys, whether she'd eaten lunch, the names of neighbors she'd known for decades. I told myself it was temporary, just until she got better, just until Daddy adjusted. But Daddy passed suddenly, one quiet morning in his sleep, and Mama never truly recovered from that loss. After that, the house needed someone who knew its rhythms, when the pipes rattled, which window didn't lock properly, how to coax the old stove into working without blowing a fuse. That someone became me. I cooked most nights. I handled the medications, the appointments, the paperwork that never seemed to end. My brother, Raymond, visited when he could, birthdays, holidays, emergencies. He lived an hour away with his wife and kids, and every visit came with a promise. "You're doing such a good job," he'd say, patting my shoulder. "We'll figure everything out together." Together. It's a beautiful word. It sounds like safety. When Mama passed, the house felt hollow in a way I can't fully explain. Grief doesn't arrive loudly. It settles. It waits. It fills corners and cupboards and makes ordinary tasks feel unbearable. Raymond came more often after that. At first, I was grateful. He helped sort paperwork, made calls to lawyers, talked about estates and wills and things I wasn't ready to face. "I'll handle the legal stuff," he said one afternoon, flipping through a folder. "You've done enough." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly. I noticed it when Raymond started locking the study door. That room had always been open. Daddy's books, Mama's sewing machine, old photo albums stacked neatly on shelves. Suddenly, it was off limits. "Just organizing," Raymond said when I asked. "You know how overwhelming this stuff can be." I let it go. Grief teaches you to choose your battles carefully, and I didn't have the strength to fight over a door. Then the mail started changing. Letters from banks I didn't recognize, envelopes addressed to Raymond at our parents' house. When I asked about them, he smiled, too quickly. "Just estate matters, boring stuff." I told myself I was being paranoid, that grief was making me suspicious, that family doesn't betray family, not like that. The day he asked me to leave came 2 weeks before the will reading. He framed it as concern, as practicality, as kindness. "You need space to heal," he said. "This place holds too many memories." What he didn't say was that he'd already decided I didn't belong there anymore. I called my aunt that night, my voice cracking as I explained. She listened quietly, then asked one simple question. "Baby, have you seen the will?" I hadn't. Raymond said it was being handled. The day of the will reading arrived gray and heavy, like the sky itself was holding its breath. I wore Mama's old cardigan, the soft blue one that still smelled faintly of lavender, and sat in the lawyer's office with my hands folded so tightly my knuckles ached. Raymond sat across from me, calm, confident, already home in his mind. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading, and with every sentence, the ground beneath me shifted. Because Mama saw more than we realized, because Daddy planned more carefully than we knew, because the truth had been waiting patiently, written in ink, sealed in silence. I felt my heart start to race. Raymond's smile faltered, and in that moment, I understood something that would change me forever. Sometimes people push you out because they're afraid of what you'll uncover if you stay. The real betrayal didn't hit me all at once. It arrived in pieces, the way grief does, quietly, insistently, refusing to be ignored. A week after I found Mama's letter, I sat at the dining table with a stack of folders spread out before me. The table still had the small burn mark near the edge, the one Daddy made years ago when he set down a hot pan without thinking. I ran my fingers over it absent-mindedly as I sorted through documents, my mind half on memories, half on numbers. That's when I noticed it. A withdrawal slip. It was folded neatly into an envelope, tucked between utility bills from the year Daddy died. The amount wasn't enormous, not enough to raise alarms at a bank, but it was significant enough to matter, and it was dated just 3 days after Daddy's funeral. My chest tightened. I checked the next folder. Another withdrawal, different amount, same timing. Always shortly after a death, a hospital stay, a moment when Mama was least likely to question anything. I didn't want to believe what my mind was already forming, so I checked again. By the time I finished, my hands were trembling. Raymond hadn't just planned ahead, he had taken advantage, not recklessly, not greedily in the way people expect betrayal to look, but carefully, quietly, in amounts small enough to hide behind grief. I sat back in my chair, the wood creaking beneath me, and stared at the wall clock. It ticked steadily, unbothered by the fact that my understanding of my brother was unraveling. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was about trust. I didn't confront him right away. That surprised even me. Instead, I waited, watched, let the truth settle into my bones so that when I finally spoke, I wouldn't be speaking from anger alone. When Raymond came by the house a few days later, he acted like nothing had changed. He walked in without knocking, the way he always had, glanced around as if checking inventory. "You've moved things," he said. "I live here," I replied evenly. He nodded, like that explanation was something he needed time to accept. We sat in the living room. The air between us felt thick, heavy with all the things we weren't saying. I handed him the envelope. "What's this?" he asked, though his eyes had already changed. "You tell me." He opened it slowly, too slowly. His shoulders stiffened as he scanned the papers. "That money," he said finally, "was for expenses, things Mama needed." "Mama didn't know about it," I said, not accusing, just stating. He exhaled sharply. "She didn't need to. I was helping." Helping. I leaned forward. "You moved me out of this house before the will was read. That wasn't—" "You listed the house, you transferred accounts, you locked me out of rooms in my own home." He stood abruptly. "I did what I thought was necessary." "For who?" I asked quietly. The question hung there, unanswered. He didn't look at me then. He stared at the floor, jaw clenched, fists tight at his sides. "I have a family," he said again, like a shield. So did I, and I was here. The silence that followed felt final. The confrontation didn't end with shouting or tears. It ended with exhaustion. Raymond gathered his things and left without another word. No apology, no explanation that could make sense of what he'd done. Just the sound of the door closing behind him. I sat alone for a long time afterward, staring at the empty space he'd occupied. I felt sad, yes, but beneath that sadness was something steadier. Clarity. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from hatred, it comes from entitlement, and realizing that freed me from the need to fix him. The lawyer advised me to document everything, not out of spite, but out of protection. So I did. I organized the papers, filed reports, followed the proper channels. I didn't embellish, I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth and let it stand on its own. Family members found out slowly. Some were shocked. Others admitted in hushed voices that they'd suspected Raymond was handling too much for a long time. A few avoided me altogether, uncomfortable with the idea that love could coexist with accountability. I didn't chase anyone. I was tired of chasing. What surprised me most was how grief shifted after that. It softened. Without the constant tension of being dismissed, pushed aside, or doubted, I could finally grieve my parents honestly. I talked to Mama out loud when I cooked her recipes. I sat in Daddy's old chair on Sunday mornings, listening to the quiet the way he used to. The house didn't feel haunted. It felt held. Weeks later, I received a message from Raymond. Just one sentence. "I didn't think it would turn out like this." I stared at it for a long time before replying. Neither did I. And that was the truth. Because sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who thought they deserved more simply because they asked for it louder. I didn't win. That's not how I see it. What I did was survive something that could have broken my sense of self if I'd let it. I chose truth over silence, dignity over approval. And slowly, quietly, I began to build something new. Not just a life in that house, but a life rooted in the understanding that love does not require erasure. As the seasons changed, so did I. I planted flowers Mama loved along the front of the house. I repainted the living room in a warm, gentle color. I invited friends over for dinners that lasted long into the evening. And every now and then, I'd catch my reflection in the hallway mirror and see a woman who had been tested and had not disappeared. The house felt different once I stepped back inside it, like it had been holding its breath, waiting to see if I would really return. I moved slowly, touching the backs of chairs, the edge of the hallway table, the door frame where Daddy had once carved our heights with a pocket knife. Everything was where I left it, yet nothing felt the same. Knowledge changes a place. Truth echoes. That night, I slept in my old bedroom for the first time since Raymond told me to leave. The sheets smelled faintly of detergent and thyme. I lay on my back, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in my own life. Still, sleep didn't come easy, because now that I knew the truth, that Mama and Daddy had protected me deliberately, I couldn't stop thinking about everything Raymond had done before he told me to leave. All the small things I brushed off, all the moments I convinced myself didn't matter. Grief makes you generous to people who don't deserve it. The next morning, I noticed more changes. The study door was still locked. The filing cabinet drawers were slightly crooked, like someone had been in a hurry. Papers were missing from the stack where Mama kept utility bills and insurance documents. I stood there for a long moment, keys heavy in my hand, listening to the quiet tick of the hallway clock. Raymond hadn't just assumed ownership, he'd been preparing for it. I made myself breakfast, toast and eggs, a meal Mama used to swear cured everything, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the place where she always sat. Her chair was pushed in too far, untouched since she passed. I thought about how often Raymond had insisted I rest while he handled things. "You don't need to worry about this," he'd say. "Let me take that burden off you." Burden. I swallowed hard. That afternoon, I called the lawyer. "I have some questions," I said carefully. He listened without interrupting as I explained the missing papers, the locked study, the sudden urgency Raymond had shown in the weeks after Mama's death. When I finished, there was a pause. "Given the circumstances," the lawyer said, "it would be wise to review the estate documents together. Transparency protects everyone, especially me." Over the next few days, the truth unfolded slowly, like a thread being pulled from a sweater. Raymond had transferred smaller accounts into his name shortly after Daddy's death, accounts Mama rarely checked anymore. He'd listed the house with a realtor informally, testing the market without telling me. He'd even spoken to contractors about renovations, as if the decision had already been made. None of it was illegal enough to make headlines, but all of it was intentional. When I confronted him, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors. We met in the living room, sunlight filtering through the curtains Mama had sewn herself. "I needed to plan," Raymond said, pacing. "I have kids, responsibilities." "So did I replied. My voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. "I gave up my job, my apartment, my time." He stopped pacing. "You chose that," he said. I looked at him then, really looked, at the man who used to share his candy with me when Mama wasn't looking, the boy who cried when Daddy scolded him, the brother who once promised we'd always have each other. "I chose love," I said quietly. "There's a difference." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I didn't think you'd need the house forever," he muttered. That was it. Not that I didn't deserve it, not that Mama wanted it differently, just that my need was inconvenient. I didn't argue anymore, because some truths don't need defending. Word traveled fast through the family. Aunties called, cousins asked careful questions. Some offered apologies for assuming I'd move on after Mama's death. Others stayed quiet, embarrassed by their own assumptions. I answered honestly, but without bitterness. "I'm staying," I said. That's what Mama wanted. There was power in saying it out loud. Raymond's wife called once. Her voice was strained, polite in a way that felt practiced. "We didn't expect this," she said. "I know," I replied. "Neither did I." After that, the call stopped. The house became mine again, not just legally, but emotionally. I cleaned the study myself, unlocking the door with the spare key Mama hid in a teacup years ago. Inside, I found documents neatly stacked, just as she'd always kept them. On top was a letter, sealed, with my name written in Mama's looping script. I sat on the floor to open it. In the letter, Mama wrote about watching me care for her, about noticing the way I set aside my own life without complaint, about worrying that kindness would be mistaken for weakness. "We wanted to make sure you were safe, not because you needed protection, but because you deserved security." I pressed the paper to my chest and cried, quietly, like a child who finally feels seen. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Raymond didn't apologize. He didn't have to. The distance between us spoke loudly enough. Some relationships don't end with explosions. They fade under the weight of unspoken truths. I started making the house mine again, rearranged furniture, opened windows, let light back into rooms that had gone dim with grief. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and gentle smiles. They told me how proud Mama would have been, how Daddy used to brag about me when he wasn't around. I listened, and for the first time, I believed them. Because I wasn't just the one who stayed behind. I was the one who stood firm. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip low, I realized something that startled me with its clarity. Being pushed out had nearly taught me to doubt my worth, but being called back by truth, by love, by the quiet foresight of my parents taught me something better, that I had always belonged, not because I fought for it, but because I never abandoned what mattered. I didn't wake up one morning suddenly brave. What I woke up with was resolve. It came quietly, the way dawn does, slow light creeping into corners that had been dark for too long. I made coffee, stood at the kitchen sink, and watched steam curl upward as if it had somewhere better to be. For the first time since Mama died, my thoughts felt ordered. Heavy, yes, but steady. I wasn't going to pretend anymore, not about the money, not about the house, and certainly not about the way Raymond had tried to rewrite our family's story with me erased from the margins. I started by doing something I'd avoided for months. I told the truth out loud. Not dramatically, not publicly, just honestly to the people who mattered. I called Aunt Loretta first. She'd always been the one who saw through smiles and polite explanations. "I think Raymond thought I wouldn't check," I said, my voice low. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Baby," she said softly, "some people count on your kindness to stay unchallenged." That stayed with me. Over the next week, I had conversations that were long overdue, with cousins who'd assumed I'd move on, with family friends who believed Raymond's version because it was easier. I didn't argue, I didn't accuse, I explained. I talked about caregiving, about what it costs to put your life on pause, about how grief makes you pliable, how easily someone can move things around while you're busy holding yourself together. Some people apologized, others looked away. I learned to accept both. The real action came when I met with the lawyer again. "I don't want to punish him," I said, "but I won't cover for him." He nodded. Then we proceed carefully. That meant formal letters, documentation, clear boundaries. Raymond was informed, officially, that any further interference with the estate or the house would be addressed legally. The withdrawals were reviewed, the attempted listing was flagged. Everything he'd done quietly was now written down, visible, undeniable. He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was through his wife. She says he's embarrassed and angry, the lawyer told me. I exhaled slowly. Those were emotions I could live with. What I hadn't expected was how public everything became without ever leaving the family. Word spreads differently when it's layered with disappointment. Church members asked gentle questions, neighbors offered knowing looks. Even people who'd always treated Raymond as the reliable one began to reassess. No one shunned him, but the pedestal cracked, and that mattered more than any confrontation. One afternoon, Raymond showed up unannounced. I heard his car before I saw him. The sound alone made my stomach tighten, but I didn't hide. I opened the door calmly and stepped onto the porch. He looked older somehow, thinner around the eyes. "I didn't think you'd go this far," he said. I folded my arms, not defensively, just firmly. "I didn't think you'd go as far as you did either." He ran a hand through his hair. "We're family." "Yes," I said, "that's why this hurts." For a moment, it looked like he might say something real, something honest. Instead, he sighed. "I was under pressure." I nodded slowly. So was I. Silence again. "I need you to understand that I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because I won't be pushed out of my own life." He looked at the house then, the porch, the windows, the flowers Mama loved. "I thought you'd leave eventually," he admitted. That was the closest thing to truth I'd heard from him in months. "I didn't," I said, "and I'm not." He left shortly after that. No shouting, no tears, just two people standing on opposite sides of a line that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. The weeks that followed were quieter. I settled into routines that felt earned: morning walks, evenings on the porch, small repairs around the house that made it feel alive again. I also started doing something new. I began writing, not for anyone else, just for me. I wrote about Mama's hands, about Daddy's laugh, about the way betrayal doesn't always look cruel. It can look practical, polite, justified. And I wrote about myself, about how easy it is to disappear when you're busy holding everyone else together. One Sunday after church, a woman I barely knew approached me. "I heard what happened," she said gently. "I just wanted to say you handled it with grace." Grace. I thought about that word all the way home. Grace doesn't mean silence. It doesn't mean acceptance. It means standing firm without becoming bitter. And that's what I was learning to do. By the time spring arrived, the house felt lighter, not because the past was resolved, but because it was no longer hidden. I'd stopped waiting for Raymond to become someone else. I'd stopped measuring my worth against his approval. I was home, not just in the house, but in myself. By the time the truth reached the wider family, it didn't arrive like a storm. It came like weather everyone pretended not to notice until the damage was already done. It started with a family gathering, one of those obligatory ones that happen after loss, when people want to prove continuity. An anniversary service for Mama at church, followed by lunch in the fellowship hall. Long tables, folding chairs, ham biscuits wrapped in foil, the smell of coffee and powdered creamer. I almost didn't go, but something in me said this was part of it, not confrontation, presence. Raymond was already there when I arrived. He stood near the back, talking to an uncle, his posture stiff, his smile tight. When he saw me, his expression flickered, surprise, irritation, something like fear. I took a seat near the front with Aunt Loretta and kept my hands folded in my lap. The pastor spoke about legacy, about how the choices we make ripple outward long after we're gone. I felt that sentence settle into my chest. After the service, people moved into small clusters, voices low, careful. Someone brought up the house. "I heard you staying there," a cousin said, not unkindly. "Yes," I replied, "that's what Mama and Daddy wanted." There it was, simple, undeniable. Raymond overheard. I saw his shoulders tense. Another relative joined us, then another. Questions came, not sharp, but curious, and with each answer I gave, calm and factual, the picture became clearer. Caregiving, the will, the protections my parents put in place. I didn't mention the withdrawals. I didn't need to. Raymond tried to redirect the conversation once, laughed a little too loudly, talked about misunderstandings, but people were listening now, not to him, to the space between his words and mine. It was the first time in my life I realized that truth doesn't need volume, it needs consistency. A week later, the call came. Raymond's wife. Her voice was tight, brittle around the edges. "The kids are asking questions. People are talking." "I'm not," I replied. There was a pause. "Raymond feels like you're turning everyone against him." I closed my eyes. "I didn't tell them anything that wasn't true. That's not the point," she said. But it was. That's when I understood something important. Consequences often feel like betrayal to the people who caused them. The formal review concluded shortly after. No criminal charges, no public spectacle, but the findings were clear. Raymond was required to return the withdrawn funds to the estate. Future involvement was limited. Everything had to be approved, documented, transparent. When the lawyer explained it, his voice was neutral, professional. Raymond sat across from me, staring at the table. "I never meant for this to happen," he said quietly. I studied him. "I believe you," I said, "but intention doesn't erase impact." He looked up then, surprised. "You always did that," he muttered, "made things sound moral." I almost smiled. I learned from Mama. The shift in the family dynamic was subtle but permanent. I wasn't treated like the quiet helper anymore. People asked my opinion. They checked in. They noticed when I spoke. Raymond wasn't shunned, but he wasn't centered either, and that mattered. Not because I needed him diminished, but because the truth had finally balanced the scales. One afternoon, months later, I found myself standing in the backyard looking at the old oak tree Daddy used to sit under. I remembered how he'd once told me, "Fair doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like patience." I finally understood what he meant. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't fought publicly. I hadn't demanded sympathy. I had stayed. I had documented. I had told the truth when asked, and that was enough. Raymond and I don't talk much anymore. On birthdays, we exchange brief messages. On holidays, polite ones. There's a distance now, not angry, just clear. I grieved that, too, because losing parents often reveals fractures you didn't know were there. And sometimes healing means accepting that not every relationship can return to what it was. What surprised me most was how much lighter I felt, not triumphant, just free. Free from explaining, free from shrinking, free from waiting for permission to belong. The house holds that freedom now. In the mornings, sunlight spills across the kitchen floor. At night, the quiet feels earned, not lonely. I still miss my parents every day, but I don't miss who I was becoming when I let myself be erased. I learned that family isn't just who shares your blood, it's who honors your presence. And sometimes, honoring yourself is the most faithful thing you can do. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in ordinary moments, the kind you almost miss if you're not paying attention. It showed up the morning I realized I'd slept through the night without waking up anxious, in the way I caught myself humming while washing dishes, in the quiet pride I felt when I balanced the checkbook without bracing for bad news. For a long time, survival had been my posture, shoulders tight, eyes scanning for what might go wrong next. Now, slowly, my body was learning something new. Safety. I began tending to the house differently, not like a caretaker preserving someone else's legacy, but like a woman building her own life within familiar walls. I repainted my bedroom a soft, warm cream, donated clothes I no longer recognized as mine, rearranged the furniture in the living room so the light fell just right in the afternoons. These weren't grand changes, but they mattered. They were declarations. I am here. I am staying. This is mine too. People noticed. Friends lingered longer when they visited. Neighbors commented on how settled I seemed. Even Aunt Loretta smiled at me one evening and said, "You look like yourself again." That sentence stayed with me because I wasn't just recovering from loss, I was recovering from erasure. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the grocery store aisle staring at a row of soups Mama used to buy when someone was sick. Without thinking, I reached for one, then paused. I didn't need to buy it anymore. Not for obligation, not for duty, not for anyone else's comfort. I smiled and put it back. Healing, I learned, often sounds like permission. I also started seeing a counselor, not because I was broken, but because I wanted language for what I'd been carrying. She listened as I talked about caregiving, about how quickly devotion can become invisible, about my brother, about how betrayal from family cuts differently. It doesn't just wound, it rearranges your sense of belonging. You were taught that love meant endurance, she said gently. Now you're learning that love can also mean boundaries. That felt true, painfully true, but freeing. Raymond stayed mostly quiet during that time. Once he sent a longer message than usual. He talked about stress, regret, how things had spiraled. I read it carefully. Then I replied with one sentence. I hope you're finding the support you need. I didn't offer reconciliation. I didn't close the door either. Some bridges don't burn. They simply stop being crossed. The house began to feel less like a monument to loss and more like a container for life. I hosted dinners again, nothing fancy, just food that lingered on the stove and conversations that didn't rush. Laughter returned to the rooms in a way that felt earned, not forced. One evening, after everyone left, I stood in the kitchen and imagined Mama watching, her arms folded, that familiar half smile on her face. You did all right, I whispered into the quiet, and for the first time, I believed it. Spring gave way to summer. I planted tomatoes in the backyard, even though I'd never been good at gardening. Some grew crooked, some didn't grow at all. I didn't take it personally. Not everything thrives the first time. I took walks in the evenings, learning the rhythm of my neighborhood again. People waved, dogs barked, life moved forward without asking for permission. And for once, I moved with it. There was still grief, of course. Grief doesn't leave, it changes shape. Some days it felt like a dull ache. Other days it caught me off guard in the middle of folding laundry or hearing an old song on the radio. I let it come when it came. I didn't rush it out. I had spent too long ignoring my own needs to start now. One afternoon, while cleaning out the last box from the attic, I found an old photo of Raymond and me as children. We were sitting on the porch steps, knees scraped, grinning like the world was ours. I sat down and looked at it for a long time. I didn't feel anger. I felt acceptance. People change. Circumstances reveal. Love doesn't always survive entitlement, and that doesn't make you cruel for seeing it clearly. I placed the photo back in the box, not on display, but not discarded either. Some memories don't belong in the living room. They belong in understanding. As summer deepened, I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't rebuilding my life. I was finally living it without permission. I made plans without checking with anyone. I rested without guilt. I trusted my instincts again. The woman who once nodded her way out of her own home would not recognize me now, and I liked that. The house no longer echoed with what was taken. It resonated with what remained: strength, memory, choice. I stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun sink behind the trees, and felt a calm settle into my bones. I had lost my parents. I had lost a version of my brother. I had almost lost myself, but I was still here, whole, rooted, unmoved. And I knew, deep down, that this story wasn't just about inheritance. It was about what happens when a woman refuses to disappear quietly. There's a quiet moment that comes after survival, after justice, after the dust settles. It doesn't announce itself. It just arrives one day and sits beside you, like an old friend who doesn't need to speak. For me, it came on a Sunday morning. The house was still, not empty, just peaceful. Sunlight slid across the floorboards Mama used to polish every Saturday, and the clock on the wall ticked in that steady, faithful way it always had. I stood there with a cup of tea warming my hands, and for the first time since everything happened, I wasn't bracing myself for anything. No arguments, no legal threats, no fear of being uprooted again. Just quiet. I realized then that the hardest part of what my brother did wasn't the eviction notice or the humiliation or even the betrayal itself. It was the way it tried to convince me that I was disposable, that my place in this family, in this home, in this life was conditional. And surviving that lie, unlearning it, that was the real work. People often ask what forgiveness looks like in situations like mine. They expect something dramatic, a reunion, tears, an apology neatly wrapped with accountability and remorse. But that's not always how real life works. Forgiveness, for me, didn't mean pretending my brother didn't hurt me. It didn't mean welcoming him back into my daily life or trusting him with my heart or my home again. Forgiveness meant this: I stopped carrying his choices as my burden. I stopped replaying conversations in my head, wondering what I could have said differently. I stopped imagining alternate endings where he chose kindness over control. I let the story be what it was, and then I stepped out of it. The will reading didn't just return a house to me, it returned my voice. For years, I had been the accommodating one, the peacemaker, the daughter who stayed, the sister who didn't rock the boat. I thought that was love. I thought silence was strength. But silence, I learned, can also be a slow erasure. Standing my ground didn't make me cruel. Telling the truth didn't make me ungrateful. Claiming what was rightfully mine didn't make me selfish. It made me whole. I think about my parents often now, not with that sharp, breath-stealing grief, but with something gentler. I remember my father's steady presence, the way he believed in fairness even when it was uncomfortable. I remember my mother's quiet wisdom, how she always said, "Pay attention to what people do when they think no one's watching." They were watching, not in some mystical way, but through the values they planted in me, through the strength they modeled, through the foresight that made sure I wouldn't be left unprotected even after they were gone. That final gift wasn't just the house, it was the reminder that I mattered. If you're listening to this and you've ever been pushed aside by family, if you've ever been told directly or subtly that your sacrifices were expected but never valued, If you've ever been made to feel like your place in someone's life was temporary or negotiable, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not wrong for wanting fairness. You are not dramatic for feeling hurt. You are not weak for needing security. And you are not obligated to disappear so others can be comfortable. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from being mistreated by someone who shares your blood. It makes you question your instincts. It makes you wonder if you're overreacting, if loyalty means tolerating disrespect. But love without respect is not loyalty. It's surrender. And you don't owe anyone that, not even family. Today, the house feels different, not because the walls changed, but because I did. I move through these rooms with confidence now. I make decisions without second-guessing myself. I speak up when something doesn't feel right. I trust the quiet voice inside me that once tried to warn me and that I won't ignore again. This home holds my past, yes, but it also holds my future. A future where I choose peace over appeasement, where I honor my boundaries as much as I honor my memories, where I take up space without apology. Sometimes in the evenings, I sit on the porch and watch the neighborhood settle down. Lights flicker on, doors close softly. Life continues in its ordinary, beautiful way. And I think about how close I came to losing all of this, not just the house, but my sense of belonging, my sense of self. I'm grateful I didn't. This story isn't about winning or losing. It's about remembering who you are when someone tries to rewrite you out of the narrative. It's about trusting that truth has a way of surfacing, even when it's delayed, even when it's inconvenient. And it's about knowing that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay. So I'll leave you with this question, the same one I asked myself when everything fell apart. If someone tried to take away your place in the world, would you quietly walk away, or would you stand long enough for the truth to catch up? Tell me what you think. And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength or a lesson you had to learn the hard way, thank you for listening, and thank you for being here. There's a certain kind of evening that feels like a full stop at the end of a long sentence. The sky turns that soft blue-gray, not quite day and not yet night. The air cools just enough to make you pull a sweater closer around your shoulders. And the world, for a moment, seems to breathe with you instead of against you. That's when the memories come back, not to hurt, but to remind. I sat at the kitchen table that evening, the same one my parents bought when I was still in high school. The surface bore tiny marks from decades of living, a faint burn from Mama's iron, a nick from when Daddy fixed a chair leg too close to the edge, pencil scratches from homework nights long gone. I ran my fingers over those marks and realized something quietly powerful. This table had seen everything. Laughter, arguments, silence, loss, and now, peace. People think healing is loud. They think it announces itself with happiness, with smiling photos, with dramatic declarations of, "I'm finally okay." But real healing is quieter than that. It slips into your life unnoticed until one day you realize you're not holding your breath anymore. I wasn't waking up anxious. I wasn't replaying the will reading in my mind. I wasn't wondering what my brother might do next. I was just living. And that felt unfamiliar at first. There were moments, of course, when the old feelings tried to creep back in. A name mentioned in passing, a family photo I hadn't seen in years, a question from a well-meaning neighbor who didn't know the full story. "Do you talk to your brother anymore?" I learned how to answer that gently, without bitterness and without lying. "We're not close," I'd say. And that was enough. Not every truth needs an explanation. Not every wound needs to be reopened to be validated. What surprised me most was how my view of myself changed. For a long time, I saw myself as the one things happened to, the one who endured, the one who survived other people's decisions. But somewhere along the way, maybe at the lawyer's office, maybe the day I unlocked my own front door again, Maybe in the quiet weeks that followed, I stopped seeing myself that way. I wasn't just someone who had been wronged. I was someone who had stood firm. I didn't yell. I didn't scheme. I didn't try to destroy anyone in return. I told the truth, trusted the process, and let integrity do what it does best, stand the test of time. That realization changed how I carried myself in every part of my life. I began setting boundaries where I once made excuses. I said no without explaining myself. I asked for what I needed without shrinking my voice. And each time I did, a small part of me healed a little more. I think that's one of the quiet lessons my parents left behind when they never had to say out loud. You don't need to become hard to be strong. You just need to be clear. Some nights, I still talk to them. Not in a dramatic way, just a sentence here or there whispered into the stillness. I handled it, Mama. I stayed true, Daddy. And in the quiet that follows, I feel something settle in my chest. Not answers, but reassurance. If this story teaches anything, it's that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes wrapped in familiarity, spoken in a voice you've trusted your whole life. And when that happens, the damage cuts deeper. Not because you're weak, but because you loved sincerely. There is no shame in that. Love is not a mistake just because someone misused it. I want you, listening to this, to take a moment and think about your own life. Is there a place where you've been shrinking to keep the peace? A truth you've been swallowing because it felt easier than standing firm? A situation where you were made to feel like your worth was negotiable? If so, I hope my story reminds you of something important. Your presence is not a favor. Your boundaries are not selfish, and your truth does not need permission to exist. I didn't get a perfect ending. My family didn't magically heal. My brother didn't come knocking with remorse in his eyes. There was no cinematic reconciliation. What I got was something quieter and more valuable. I got my dignity, I got my home, and I got my sense of self back. That is enough. Today, when I lock the door at night, I do it with intention, not fear. When I sit in the living room, I do it knowing I belong there. When I make plans for the future, I do it without bracing for someone else to pull the ground from beneath me. This house holds my past, yes, but it also holds my strength. And every day I live here, I honor the people who raised me and the woman I became because of what I survived. So let me ask you, gently, before we part. If someone you trusted tried to erase your place in your own story, would you doubt yourself, or would you stand long enough for the truth to speak? If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments. Your voice matters more than you know. And if you find comfort in stories like this, stories of truth, resilience, and quiet strength, stay with me. There are more lessons, more reflections, and more moments of healing ahead. Even now, years later, I sit in that house and sometimes pause, just listening. The clock ticks in the hallway, the breeze shifts the curtains, a neighbor's dog barks faintly in the distance, and for the first time in a long time, the silence feels full, not empty. It wasn't always like this. After my parents passed, I thought the world had shrunk. I thought I was small. I thought that because my brother had chosen to push me out, because he had believed I didn't belong, that I might never reclaim my life. For weeks, I wandered through my own home like a visitor, every room a reminder of what I had lost, every photograph a mirror reflecting absence. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't disappear just because someone wants it to. It waits, quietly, for patience and courage to meet it. I learned that the hard way. Each small act, speaking up, documenting wrongs, protecting myself, refusing to vanish, was a step toward that quiet arrival of justice. Not revenge, not spectacle, just the steady, undeniable affirmation that my existence mattered, that my voice mattered. When I look back at my brother now, I feel a complicated mix. There's grief for what should have been. There's sorrow for the moments lost to anger, pride, and misunderstanding. But there is no hatred. I realized hatred doesn't protect you, it confines you. And I had spent enough years being confined by fear and doubt. Rebuilding my life was not glamorous. It was domestic. It was slow. It was ordinary. I painted walls the colors I loved, not what someone else expected. I planted flowers I could care for without judgment. I cooked meals that smelled like home, filling the kitchen with warmth instead of tension. I said no when I needed to say no, and yes only when it truly resonated with me. I found small joys I hadn't permitted myself to enjoy for years. Morning walks where I breathed without bracing, cups of tea held between my hands as the world woke around me, quiet evenings spent reading, listening to music, or simply watching the sunset spill across the backyard. Those ordinary moments became acts of reclamation. Each one reminded me that I belonged here, that I belonged to myself. I also learned the power of boundaries, not as punishment to others, but as protection for myself. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't require reconciliation. Sometimes it's simply a choice to stop carrying someone else's misdeeds as your burden. I forgave, not to absolve my brother, but to free myself from the weight of his choices. That is a subtle, almost invisible form of strength, but it is enduring. And the lessons didn't stop there. I discovered that family is complex and love doesn't guarantee respect. Blood doesn't always ensure loyalty. Sometimes the people closest to you will stumble, and sometimes they will fail to see your worth. But that doesn't define you. Your presence, your integrity, your voice, they remain yours regardless of how others behave. That is the truth I carry forward. I think about my parents often, not with the sharp sting of loss, but with gratitude. They taught me resilience even when I didn't recognize it. They modeled kindness, patience, and fairness. And even in their absence, their guidance shaped the woman I became, someone who stands, who speaks, who refuses to be invisible. Their final gift wasn't the inheritance or the house itself. It was the knowledge that I was capable of owning my life fully with dignity and tact. Life continues. I am no longer the sibling who's silently accommodated. I am the woman who claims her space, her voice, and her peace. I meet the world differently now, calmly, assertively, and with eyes wide open. The house is still, but it is alive with the sound of my life. The past sits beside me, acknowledged and honored, but it no longer defines me. I tell this story not to boast, not to seek sympathy, but to offer a mirror. There may be someone listening who has felt invisible, sidelined, or pushed out of their own life by people they trusted. Perhaps a parent, a sibling, a spouse, a friend. Maybe you've been told your worth is conditional. Maybe you've been told your voice doesn't matter. I want you to hear this. Your presence is never conditional. Your voice is never disposable. Your life is yours to claim. Courage doesn't have to roar. It can be quiet. It can be steady. It can be the calm act of standing firm while the world around you rushes to rewrite the story. It can be the patience to let truth reveal itself in time. And it can be the choice to embrace your life fully and unapologetically without waiting for approval or permission. If there is one thing I hope you take from my journey, it is this. Owning yourself is the most radical act of all. It doesn't erase the pain of betrayal. It doesn't fix every broken relationship, but it does give you a foundation that no one can take from you. It allows you to breathe, to rebuild, to plant new roots and live fully, even in the wake of loss. So, I ask you now gently, if someone tried to erase you from your own story, Would you shrink, or would you stand long enough to let truth find its way? Would you reclaim your voice, even if it's just in the quiet of your own home, or would you let fear dictate the rest of your life? Your story, like mine, is yours to claim, and I hope you do. I hope you stand. I hope you breathe. I hope you let yourself exist fully, unapologetically, and without hesitation. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own resilience, your own journey of truth, or your own need to reclaim your life, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what strength looks like for you. Tell me what boundaries you've had to set and the lessons you've learned along the way. And if you want to continue hearing stories like mine, stories of courage, family, truth, and quiet empowerment, please subscribe. There will always be more lessons, more reflections, and more moments of human resilience waiting for you. Remember, the world may try to write you out, but your voice, your choices, and your life belong only to you. Stand firm, stay present, and let the truth be your guide. The house is quiet now. The night has settled. I sit in my favorite chair, a blanket over my knees, a cup of tea in my hands. Outside, the world moves on, but inside, I feel a stillness that is earned, not given. I am here. I am whole. I am home. And that, my friends, is enough.